I spent 10 years shrinking myself so my husband could feel big. But when he looked at his colleagues across our anniversary table and dismissed me as only a wife, he didn't know he was talking to the silent owner of the very company he was trying to impress. The chandelier above our table at the Waldorf Astoria cast a fractured, icy light over the crystal wine glasses. It was our 10th wedding anniversary. 10 years. A decade of my life poured into the foundation of a man who was currently checking his Rolex for the third time in 10 minutes. Leonard adjusted his bespoke Italian silk tie, a gift I had bought him for his recent promotion to Senior Director of Acquisitions at Hayes and Carmichael. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, his eyes darting toward the mahogany doors of the private dining room we had reserved. Or rather, the room I had reserved months in advance, dreaming of a quiet, intimate evening where we might finally look at each other and remember who we used to be. Instead, there were 4 settings at the table. They should be here any minute, Leonard muttered, picking up his phone and typing a frantic message. Richard hates being late, and if we're going to close this deal with Harrison Capital by Friday, tonight has to go flawlessly. I took a slow, measured sip of my sparkling water. It's our anniversary, Leonard. You promised me tonight would just be us. You swore you'd leave the Harrison deal at the office. Leonard sighed, the sound sharp and entirely devoid of apology. He gave me that familiar, patronizing smile, the one he reserved for when I was being unreasonable. Scarlett, sweetheart, you know how this industry works. Or, well, you don't, but trust me, it never sleeps. Richard practically demanded we do this dinner tonight. I couldn't say no to the CEO. Besides, Chloe is coming, and she's been instrumental in drafting the preliminary contracts. It's just dinner. We can celebrate our anniversary this weekend. I'll take you to that spa in the Berkshires you like. You took me to that spa in the Berkshires for my birthday, Leonard. 2 years ago, I replied quietly. Before he could offer another hollow excuse, the heavy wooden doors swung open. The Methra ushered in 2 people. The first was Richard Grayson, a man in his late 50s, with the posture of an emperor and the cold, assessing eyes of a shark. He was the CEO of Hayes and Carmichael, the man Leonard worshipped. Behind him walked Chloe. Chloe was 26, freshly graduated from an Ivy League MBA program, and practically radiated aggressive ambition. She wore a sleek, backless emerald gown that was entirely inappropriate for a corporate dinner, but perfectly calculated to make every man in the room turn his head. Leonard certainly did. I watched my husband's posture change. His chest puffed out, his jaw tightened, and a sickeningly eager smile plastered itself across his face. Richard! Chloe! Thank you so much for coming! Leonard stood so fast his chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. He shook Richard's hand with both of his, then kissed Chloe's cheek with a lingering familiarity that made the skin on the back of my neck prickle. Leonard, Richard said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone. He turned his gaze to me. And this must be Scarlett. Happy anniversary, my dear. I apologize for hijacking your evening, but business waits for no milestone. It's a pleasure to meet you, Richard, I said, offering a polite, practiced smile. I didn't stand up. I let him come to me, extending my hand gracefully. Leonard speaks of you constantly. It's entirely fine. I'm always happy to support him. Chloe took the seat directly across from me, next to Leonard. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the pristine white tablecloth. You're so understanding, Scarlett, Chloe said. Her voice was honeyed, but her eyes were flat and appraising. If it were me, I'd be furious. But I suppose when you don't have the pressure of corporate deadlines on your shoulders, it's easier to be flexible with your time. Leonard chuckled. A short, nervous, complicit little sound. Scarlett is a saint. Honestly, I don't know how she deals with me. The waiter materialized, pouring a 2015 Bordeaux that cost more than my first car. The conversation immediately bypassed me, shifting into a rapid-fire exchange of corporate jargon, market projections, and the imminent restructuring of their firm. Hayes and Carmichael was struggling. They were a legacy real estate and asset management firm that had failed to modernize. They desperately needed an infusion of capital, which they were praying to get from a shadow investor group known only as the Vanguard Syndicate. I sat there in my midnight blue Carolina Herrera dress, expertly cutting my pan-seared scallops into impossibly small pieces, and listened to them panic. The syndicate is playing hardball, Richard grumbled, swirling the dark red wine in his glass. Their representatives are ghosting our emails. If they pull out of the acquisition, our stock plummets by Tuesday. We need to find out who the principal decision maker is and get them in a room. Wine them, dine them, give them whatever equity they want. I have a few contacts in Chicago who might know someone on their board, Chloe offered, leaning closer to Leonard. As she reached for her water glass, her sleeve slipped down. The dining room light caught the gold rim of her bracelet. A Cartier love bracelet, yellow gold, with 4 diamonds. My breath hitched, just a fraction. 2 weeks ago, I had been doing our monthly household book balancing. I had noticed a bizarre transfer of $11,000 from our joint savings to an obscure offshore credit card. Leonard thought I didn't have the password to. When I tracked the purchase, it had been at the Cartier boutique on Newbury Street. When I asked him casually if he was planning a surprise for our anniversary, he had panicked and mumbled something about an expensive set of custom golf clubs he bought for a client. The client was sitting across from me, smiling at my husband. "We'll figure it out, Richard," Leonard said confidently, his eyes locked on Chloe. "We always do." Richard sighed, leaning back and finally looking at me, perhaps out of a fleeting sense of guilt for ignoring the wife on her anniversary. "So, Scarlett," he said, attempting pleasantry, "Leonard tells me you're a homemaker. Do you have any hobbies? Charities? How do you fill your days while this one is chained to his desk?" I placed my fork down on the porcelain plate. I opened my mouth to speak, to tell him about the small garden I kept, the books I read, the safe, benign lies I had crafted. But Leonard beat me to it. He let out an amused, dismissive laugh, waving his hand in the air as if swatting away a fly. "Oh, Scarlett. She's only a wife, Richard. She keeps the house looking like a magazine, though. Bless her heart. She tries her best with her little Pinterest projects and her book clubs, but she wouldn't know a profit and loss margin if it bit her. We leave the heavy lifting to the professionals." The words hung in the air. "Only a wife." Chloe smirked, taking a delicate sip of her wine to hide her triumphant smile. Richard looked mildly uncomfortable, offering a stiff nod. Leonard just looked at me, expecting me to smile, to nod, to play the meek, beautiful accessory he believed he had purchased 10 years ago. He expected me to absorb the humiliation, digest it, and turn it into a pleasant evening. I stared at him, really looked at the man I had married. The slight receding of his hairline he spent thousands trying to hide, the weakness in his chin, the desperate, hollow ambition in his eyes. "Only a wife," I repeated, my voice terrifyingly calm, barely above a whisper. "Well, you know what I mean, honey," Leonard said, his tone instantly defensive. "You have a relaxing life. I provide for us so you don't have to worry about the stress of the real world. There's no shame in it." No shame. He had no idea. He had absolutely, fundamentally, no idea who he was sitting across from. To understand the sheer, astronomical magnitude of Leonard's delusion, you have to go back 7 years. When Leonard and I first met, we were both hungry, entry-level financial analysts at a massive consulting firm in downtown Boston. I was the girl from a working-class family in Southie who had clawed her way through a double major in economics and computer science at MIT on a full academic scholarship. Leonard was the legacy kid from a wealthy Connecticut family who got his job because his uncle golfed with the managing partner. We fell in love in the chaotic rush of 80-hour work weeks and cold takeout coffee. He was charming, handsome, and he made me laugh. But more importantly, back then, he seemed to respect my mind. That respect shattered 3 years into our marriage. A senior VP position opened up. We both applied for it. I was infinitely more qualified. I had coded a proprietary data sorting algorithm in my spare time that had saved the firm $4 million in administrative waste that quarter alone. Leonard had a great smile and a solid golf handicap. The firm gave me the promotion. The day I came home to tell him, I brought a bottle of champagne. I expected us to celebrate. Instead, I found Leonard sitting in the dark in our living room, a half-empty glass of scotch in his hand. He didn't congratulate me. He looked at me with a mixture of resentment and deep, emasculated rage. For the next 6 months, our marriage became a war zone. He was cruel, distant, and started drinking heavily. He told me I had embarrassed him in front of his peers, that a real woman wouldn't humiliate her husband by stepping on his neck to climb the ladder. I was young, I was in love, and I was terrified of a divorce. So, I made the biggest mistake of my life. I shrank myself to make him comfortable. I quit the firm. I told him the stress was too much, that I wanted to focus on our home, maybe prepare for the children we were supposedly going to have. The transformation in Leonard was instantaneous. The very next day, the loving, charming man returned. Without me in his way, he thrived. He moved to Hayes and Carmichael, playing the role of the dominant provider, while I baked artisan sourdough and decorated our suburban colonial house. But a mind like mine doesn't just turn off because a fragile man needs it to. 6 months into my retirement, I was losing my mind with boredom. I started playing around with the stock market, using a few $1,000s I had secretly saved. Within a month, I tripled it. I realized the financial sector was bleeding money because they lacked proper predictive analytics for commercial real estate crashes. I called my best friend from MIT, Sarah, who was now a ruthless corporate attorney in Manhattan. I have an algorithm, I told her, over a burner phone I bought at a CVS. It predicts market fluctuations in commercial real estate with a 94% accuracy rate. I want to start a consulting firm, but my name can't be anywhere on the public filings. Leonard can never know. Sarah didn't ask questions. She set up the LLCs. She created the blind trusts. She acted as the public face and CEO of the company we named Vanguard Syndicate. Yes, that Vanguard Syndicate. For the past 7 years, while Leonard thought I was upstairs in my craft room knitting sweaters and watching daytime television, I was commanding a multi-million-dollar financial empire. I traded in my sweatpants. I wore noise-canceling headphones, managing a remote team of 60 developers and analysts across the globe. I built a fortune so massive that Leonard's impressive six-figure salary looked like loose change in my couch cushions. I funneled just enough money into a separate, clean allowance account to make Leonard think he was entirely supporting me. I let him pay the mortgage. I let him buy my cars. I let him pat me on the head and tell me I was a good girl for making sure the dry cleaning was picked up on time. I had originally planned to tell him the truth. On our 5th anniversary, I had a speech prepared. I was going to show him the bank accounts, the portfolio, the sheer success of what we could share. But that was the year I found the first burner phone in his gym bag. That was the year I realized my husband wasn't just insecure. He was a serial philanderer who got off on the power dynamic of a helpless wife waiting at home while he conquered the world and other women. I didn't divorce him then, because I realized something darker, something colder within myself. I wanted to build my empire so high that when I finally dropped him, the fall would completely destroy him. And now, here we were, 10 years in. Hayes and Carmichael had made a series of catastrophic investments. They were bleeding out. Their only salvation was a total buyout, and they had come begging to the Vanguard Syndicate for a lifeline. For the past 3 months, through Sarah, I had been meticulously auditing every single file, contract, and email inside Leonard's firm. I knew their margins, I knew their liabilities, and I knew that Leonard had been embezzling company funds to pay for luxury hotel rooms and Cartier bracelets for Chloe. Sitting at that table, looking at the smug, punchable faces of my husband and his mistress, feeling the weight of the word only hanging around my neck like a lead chain, the last remnants of my love for Leonard Miller evaporated. It didn't burn away, it just ceased to exist, replaced by a glacial, perfect clarity. She's only a wife. I took a breath. The air in the room felt suddenly very thin, very cold. The silence following Leonard's comment stretched for a painful 3 seconds. Then, I smiled. It wasn't my usual soft, placating wife smile. It was a smile that didn't reach my eyes, a sharp, terrifying curving of the lips that made Richard Grayson subtly shift his weight in his chair. "You're absolutely right, Leonard," I purred, picking up my wineglass and taking a slow, deliberate sip. "I don't deal with the stress of your world. I suppose I wouldn't know the first thing about the pressure of, say, trying to hide a 12% deficit in your Q3 commercial real estate portfolio just to make a company look attractive to a buyer." The effect was instantaneous. Leonard's patronizing chuckle died in his throat. Chloe's wineglass stopped halfway to her mouth. Richard's eyes snapped to me, narrowing into sharp slits. "Excuse me?" Richard said, his voice dangerously low. Leonard turned pale, his eyes wide with panic. "Scarlett, what are you talking about?" "Richard, I apologize. She watches these financial thrillers on Netflix." "I'm talking about the properties in the downtown sector," I interrupted smoothly, ignoring my husband entirely. I locked eyes with Richard, the ones on 4th and Elm. Your firm valued them at 40 million in the prospectus you sent to Vanguard, but anyone with a rudimentary understanding of the city's new zoning laws knows those buildings require extensive asbestos remediation before they can be rezoned for commercial use. The real valuation is closer to 28 million. You're inflating your assets, Richard. Vanguard isn't going to like that. The silence in the private dining room was now deafening. You could hear the faint, muffled sounds of the jazz band playing in the main restaurant, but at our table, oxygen had ceased to flow. Chloe looked like she had just been slapped. How... how do you know about the Elm Street properties? She stammered, her polished, arrogant veneer cracking. That's classified internal data. Only the senior executive team has those files. Oh, Chloe, I said gently, leaning forward and resting my chin on my hands. I let my eyes drop to her wrist. I know a lot of things. I know about zoning laws. I know about inflated profit margins. And I know that yellow gold washes out your skin tone. You really should have asked for platinum. Chloe yanked her arm under the table as if the Cartier bracelet had suddenly caught fire. Leonard was practically hyperventilating. Scarlett, shut up! What the hell is wrong with you? He slammed his hand on the table, the silverware rattling violently. Have you been snooping through my briefcase? Are you insane? You're ruining my career right now. Your career? I laughed, a genuine bright sound that echoed off the mahogany walls. Leonard, sweetheart, your career is a sinking ship, and you're currently screaming at the only lifeboat in the water. Richard Grayson was an apex predator in the corporate world, and predators recognize when the temperature in the room changes. He held up a hand, silencing Leonard instantly. He leaned forward, ignoring his panicked senior director, and gave me his full, undivided attention. Mrs. Miller, Richard said, his tone entirely stripped of the earlier condescension. Who exactly are you? I'm just a wife, Richard, I said softly. My phone buzzed in my clutch, a single vibration. The signal. I opened my purse, pulled out my phone, and unlocked the screen. It was a text from Sarah. The ink is dry. Transfer complete. We own 51% of Hayes and Carmichael voting stock. You are the boss. Give 'em hell. I took a deep breath, savoring the absolute intoxicating rush of power. 10 years of biting my tongue. 10 years of dulling my shine so a mediocre man could cast a shadow. It was over. I placed the phone face up on the white tablecloth and slid it across to Richard. He looked down at it. He read the text message. He read the sender's name. Sarah Vance, General Counsel, Vanguard Syndicate. I watched the color drain from the CEO's face. I watched an older, powerful man realize in real time that his legacy, his fortune, and his future were entirely in the hands of the woman he had just asked about her little hobbies. Good God, Richard whispered, staring at the screen as if it were a bomb. He looked up at me, absolute terror in his eyes. You are. I'm the principal decision-maker at Vanguard, I said, my voice cutting through the room like a scalpel. I sat back, crossing my legs, feeling the silk of my dress whisper against my skin. I built the algorithm that makes my company hundreds of millions. I orchestrated the buyout of your failing firm, and as of 3 minutes ago, Richard, I own you. Leonard let out a breathless, manic laugh. Richard, don't listen to her. She's having a psychotic break. Scarlett, stop this right now. This isn't funny. It's not a joke, Leonard, Richard said, his voice hollow. He didn't look at my husband. He couldn't take his eyes off me. She owns the syndicate. Leonard froze. The denial in his brain fought violently with the reality unfolding in front of him. He looked at Richard, then at the phone, and finally, at me. The realization hit him like a physical blow. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The arrogant, chest-puffing man who had walked into the restaurant was gone, replaced by a terrified little boy. Now, I said, picking up my wineglass again, let's talk about the restructuring of my new company, because I'm looking at a lot of dead weight at this table. The transition of Leonard Miller from an arrogant, chest-thumping executive to a cornered animal took exactly 45 seconds. First came the violent rejection of reality. He shook his head, a forced, frantic smile stretching across his face, looking desperately at Richard as if the CEO might suddenly declare this all a hidden camera television show. But Richard was entirely still. Richard was a survivor, a man who had navigated 3 decades of corporate bloodshed, and he was currently recalculating his entire existence based on the woman sitting across from him. Scarlett, Leonard breathed, his voice cracking. He reached across the table, trying to grab my hand. I pulled it back instantly, resting it on my lap. Scarlett, this is insane. You, Vanguard? But you don't even like math. I don't like doing your math, Leonard. I corrected him smoothly. There is a distinct difference. But. His eyes darted around the room, the gears in his mind grinding so loudly I could almost hear them. Then, a sickening shift occurred. The panic began to recede, replaced by a sudden, avaricious gleam. His posture straightened. The delusion returned, morphing into a new grotesque shape. Wait, wait a minute. You own it? We own it? Scarlett, my God, do you know what this means? The capital, the assets. We're practically billionaires. Why didn't you tell me? We could have combined our portfolios. I could have run the acquisition from the inside. He was actually smiling. He was envisioning the yachts, the country clubs, the endless stream of power. He thought my empire was his empire, because I possessed a wedding ring he hadn't respected in a decade. There is no we, Leonard, I said. The temperature in my voice could have frozen mercury. His smile faltered. What are you talking about? We're married. Massachusetts is an equitable distribution state. Whatever you built, we built together. Half of that company is mine. I let out a slow, melodic laugh. Oh, Leonard, you really should have paid more attention when I asked you to sign those post-nuptial tax restructuring documents 3 years ago. The ones your lawyer friends told you were standard procedure for my little inheritance from my grandmother. Vanguard isn't in my name. It's held in a series of irrevocable blind trusts based in Delaware, entirely insulated from marital assets. You have absolutely zero legal claim to a single dime. I made sure of it the day I found the first burner phone. Chloe gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. Leonard's face drained of the last drops of color. Burner, you. Did you honestly think I didn't know? I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, invading his space. I build predictive behavioral algorithms for a living. Leonard, you think I couldn't spot the glaring anomalies in my own husband's routine? The mysterious late-night strategy sessions, the sudden interest in Pilates, the faint smell of Le Labo Santal 33 on your lapels when you came home? I've known about Chloe for 6 months. I knew about Jessica from HR before her, and I knew about the waitress in Nantucket 3 years ago. Leonard shrank back into his chair as if I had struck him. Richard Grayson cleared his throat. It was a harsh, dry sound. He had completely abandoned his meal. Mrs. Miller. Scarlett. Let us separate the personal from the professional for a moment. You hold the majority voting stock of Hayes and Carmichael. What are your immediate directives? Richard didn't care about Leonard's infidelity. He cared about his own survival. He was publicly bowing to the new king, and he was doing it right in front of my husband. My immediate directives, Richard, require a bit of house cleaning, I said, my gaze shifting from Leonard to the CEO. As part of the acquisition audit, my team at Vanguard did a forensic sweep of your internal ledgers. We found some fascinating discrepancies in the acquisitions department's expense accounts, specifically Leonard's accounts. Leonard's head snapped up, pure, unadulterated terror flooding his eyes. Scarlett, stop. It seems my husband, I continued, projecting my voice so every syllable was razor sharp, has been creatively rerouting company funds for the past 18 months. A phantom consulting fee here, an inflated contractor invoice there, totaling exactly $412,000. Chloe turned completely white. She looked at Leonard, her eyes wide with shock. You told me that money was from your personal trust fund, she whispered. Shut up, Chloe, Leonard hissed, sweat beading on his forehead. He turned back to me, his hands shaking violently. Scarlett, please, let's go home. We can talk about this. I'll do whatever you want. I'll quit. I'll end it with her. Just, please don't do this here. I'm not doing anything, Leonard. I'm just reviewing the facts, I said calmly. I looked at Chloe. He bought your Cartier bracelet with stolen company money, Chloe. He paid for your weekends at the Four Seasons in Aspen using fraudulent vendor invoices. You didn't bag a wealthy executive. You bagged a petty thief in a bespoke suit. Chloe's survival instincts, honed by years of ruthless Ivy League competition, kicked in instantly. She pushed her chair back, distancing herself from Leonard physically and metaphorically. Mr. Grayson, she said, her voice trembling but determined. I had absolutely no knowledge of the origin of those funds. I am prepared to hand over all gifts and cooperate fully with any internal investigation. You scheming little bitch, Leonard snarled at her, his facade completely shattering. Enough! Richard slammed his palm flat against the table. The glasses rattled. He looked at Leonard with absolute disgust. You arrogant, stupid fool. You stole from this firm? From me? Richard, it was a loan. I was going to pay it back after my Q4 bonus, Leonard pleaded, his voice reaching a pathetic, high-pitched whine. Your Q4 bonus? Richard laughed, a dark, bitter sound. He looked at me, a silent question in his eyes. I gave him a single, infinitesimal nod. Richard turned back to Leonard. Leonard Miller, your employment at Hayes and Carmichael is terminated, effective immediately, for cause. You will leave your company phone and keycard on this table. Security will box up your personal effects and mail them to you. Furthermore, our legal department will be contacting the authorities regarding the embezzlement. Richard, please! Leonard was openly weeping now, tears streaming down his face, ruining his perfectly groomed appearance. I'll go to prison! Scarlett, please! You can't let him do this! You're my wife! We took vows! We did take vows, I agreed softly, and you broke every single one of them. You wanted a traditional wife, Leonard? You wanted someone who stayed home, kept the house quiet, and let you be the master of the universe? I gave you exactly what you asked for. But you forgot one crucial detail. I stood up. I smoothed the wrinkles from my Carolina Herrera dress, feeling the weight of the room entirely on my shoulders, exactly where it belonged. I am the architect of my own universe, I said, looking down at the broken man sobbing at the table. I just let you rent a room in it, and your lease is up. I didn't stay for dessert. I picked up my beaded clutch from the table, smoothed the non-existent wrinkles from my Carolina Herrera dress, and walked out of the private dining room. I didn't look back. I left the heavy mahogany doors cracked open just enough so that the muffled, pathetic sound of Leonard's frantic hyperventilating followed me down the velvet-lined hallway. When I stepped out of the opulent lobby of the Waldorf Astoria and into the cool, relentless rush of Manhattan, the night air tasted like absolute, intoxicating freedom. I hailed a black luxury sedan and gave the driver the address to a boutique hotel in Soho. I had already booked their top-floor penthouse suite for the next 2 months. I didn't go back to our sprawling suburban colonial house in Connecticut. There was absolutely no need. While Leonard and I had been sitting under crystal chandeliers, sipping vintage Bordeaux and playing the roles of the successful executive and his decorative wife, a premium, white-glove moving service had been at the house. Under the supervision of my private security detail, they had packed up every single item I owned. My custom wardrobe, my encrypted servers, the antique first edition books I cherished, the original artwork I had purchased. They boxed it all with surgical precision and moved it into a climate-controlled, secure storage facility. The house was stripped of my essence, leaving behind a hollow, echoing shell. All I left on the cold marble of the kitchen island was his wedding ring and a thick manila envelope. Inside that envelope were the divorce papers, already signed by a judge and fast-tracked by a team of relentless attorneys who specialized in financially annihilating adulterous spouses. Beside those papers lay a printed, color-coded dossier containing every text message, every luxury hotel receipt, every explicit photograph, and every damning financial ledger proving his embezzlement. A duplicate of that exact dossier had already been securely transmitted to the Fraud Division of the Securities and Exchange Commission at 7:00 p.m. The fallout was swift, brutal, and utterly breathtaking to watch unfold. By Wednesday morning, Hayes and Carmichael officially announced their acquisition by the Vanguard Syndicate. The press release noted a major executive restructuring to address immediate operational redundancies. Leonard's name, biography, and professional headshot were completely scrubbed from the company's corporate directory before the stock market even opened. By Friday, federal investigators were swarming the Hayes and Carmichael offices. Leonard was officially indicted for corporate fraud, grand larceny, and embezzlement. Without the ironclad legal protection of the firm, and with his personal bank accounts entirely frozen due to the federal investigation, he couldn't even afford to hire a mid-tier defense attorney, let alone the high-powered fixers he used to drink scotch with. He unraveled with spectacular speed. Over the course of 4 days, he tried to call me 72 times. He left manic, rambling voicemails that swung wildly between tearful, begging apologies, and vitriolic, screaming threats about how I had ruined his life. Scarlett, please, you have to call them off. I don't have anything. I'll do whatever you want. I'll scrub the floors. Just please don't let them take me to jail. Followed hours later by, you vindictive, crazy bitch. You planned this. You trapped me. I listened to all of them while sitting on the sprawling private terrace of my Soho penthouse, wrapped in a silk robe, sipping a perfectly pulled shot of espresso. I felt absolutely nothing for him. No anger, no pity, no sorrow. Just a profound, sweeping sense of peace. I forwarded every single voicemail to my legal team to add to the harassment injunction. Chloe, operating purely on the ruthless survival instincts honed in her Ivy League MBA program, vanished into the corporate ether. The absolute second the scandal broke, and federal agents knocked on her door, she severed all ties with Leonard. She threw him completely under the bus, claiming she was a naive victim of his predatory manipulation. She leveraged her full and transparent cooperation with Richard Grayson into a quiet lateral move at a different financial firm in London. She didn't get to keep the Cartier love bracelet, though. The authorities seized it straight off her wrist as material evidence of stolen corporate funds. As for Richard Grayson, he kept his position as CEO, but he answered exclusively to me. 3 weeks after the dinner, I walked into the Hayes and Carmichael boardroom to oversee the transition. Richard stood up the moment I entered. He never looked at me the same way after that anniversary dinner. The arrogant condescension was entirely gone, replaced by a healthy, palpable, suffocating fear. He didn't call me Scarlett anymore. He called me ma'am. A year later, the divorce was finalized, and the criminal justice system had finished chewing Leonard up. He accepted a plea deal because he had no capital left to fight. The man who had based his entire fragile identity on bespoke Italian silk suits, expensive watches, and exclusive golf club memberships was sentenced to 36 months in a federal minimum security facility in Pennsylvania. He was now wearing state-issued khaki, answering to a warden, and eating dinner off a stamped metal tray. On what would have been our 11th wedding anniversary, I walked into the Vanguard Syndicate's newly constructed global headquarters in downtown Boston. The space was a masterpiece of glass, steel, and brilliant natural light. My team buzzed with electric energy, brilliant minds collaborating on global market shifts and predictive modeling. I walked into my sprawling corner office, which overlooked the sweeping expanse of the harbor. I sat down at my massive executive desk, booted up my multi-monitor array, and caught the reflection of the woman in the glass. I was not a secondary character. I was not a supporting act. I was not something to be shelved in a quiet, lonely house to protect a fragile, mediocre man's ego. I smiled, a real, dangerous, genuine smile that finally reached my eyes. I was nobody's only. Sometimes, the most dangerous person in the room is the one you assume has no power at all. Thank you so much for reading this story. If Scarlett's brilliant revenge satisfied you, please hit that like button, share this story with anyone who needs a reminder of their own worth, and don't forget to subscribe for more dramatic, real-life inspired stories. Have you ever been underestimated? Tell me your story in the comments below. See you in the next video.